What's going on, everyone? Mattman here. I thought it would be kind of fun to do a stream about the discrepancies between humans and primates. Clearly, this is a contention that the critics have, saying that we cannot delineate the difference between us and one of those weird monkey things in the zoo. So, for those illogical brain dead people, we are going to be doing this stream covering the vast amounts of differences between the two. As you know, we have a book coming out fairly soon on the Human Evolution Handbook. This is being written by Standing for Truth, who is actually working on two books at the same time. And this one has taken a little bit of a back burner. So, nonetheless, I think that it would be still fun to touch on the subject and talk a little bit about Neanderthals as well, because that also is one of those subjects that really just confuses some of the Christians out there. So it's always good to give as much clarity as we can to every single subject that's out there. Obviously, we know that Charles Lyell was the first one to say that we should try to push this agenda as far as we can to make humans believe we're came from the orangutan. So he did a very good job, as you would imagine, but unfortunately for him, it is non-scientific because everything that he has done is worked backwards, and people from that time, I should say up until now, have been working backwards trying to prove that that's true, removing any falsifications that have come up, no matter how many prediction failures they have had. They don't care. It really just doesn't matter to them. Truth doesn't matter, only as long as it proves what they want to believe is true. Obviously, we know about the genetic discrepancies and the genetic boundaries that exist that they actually ignore. Um, the list really goes on and on. I like this one because really the evidence is just so much out there on our side that it's really hard for them to ignore it. But they're masters of dodging and dipping and diving and ducking. So what can you really do? All we can do is at this point just inform the creationist about what's going on. So in this picture, it is obviously clear that we can delineate and show that there's a divide between apes and humans. And yes, it really doesn't matter what type of ape. So we are going to use our supposed kissing cousin, the chimpanzee, when we're trying to show similarities as much as possible between what we found in the fossil record. So one of the images I like to show is the skulls of the humans versus the skulls of the primates that we have. Humans always have very similar things in common down the line. Of course, they want to line these things up and show a progression, but in reality, it's actually the opposite of what they would expect to find. You wouldn't expect the first form of a human being to have a skull like a Denisovan and Neanderthal, much larger than our own. It goes against what they're trying to show, was this progression of small up into large. So what we do know is that the evidence suggests that humans have always been humans and apes have always been apes. It's really just that simple. They want to convolute it and they want to take evidence, anything that they can find, and say, well, look at this. We found a little bit of the hierarchical pattern in this, and that becomes their evidence. That's why they like cladistics so much. It's all play on words. They love to do that. So let's jump right into this and look at the human skull. Very simplistic, very simple way to distinguish a human skull when we find one in the fossil record. They like to point out the one thing that we see on some of these skulls. As you notice, it is lacking a chin on some of them. You'll see it on the Denisovan and Neanderthal. And on the far right, sometimes you'll see it in the Homo erectus. And the reason we find it on those is because obviously we're all human beings, and obviously being related, you're going to get some pathological differences. So what would cause a human to lack a modern day distinct chin? Well, inbreeding would. And we know that today because we have actual evidence of it. Here is a study that you can find on the dental cavities of Aboriginal Australians. And they wanted to figure out how are they doing. But rather than looking at the teeth, we are going to be looking at the skull from the study. Clearly a modern day human being, not a Neanderthal by any means. But what we do notice is that when you take them and you line them up, something amazing happens. It is absolutely clear and obvious that the chin is from inbreeding. Now, this is obviously shunned by a lot of the critics because when we bring it up, they quickly deny it. But you can't really deny what's visually directly in front of you. We use this study to show that the abnormalities that we find are what you would expect if the creation model was true. So the fossil record actually is great evidence for us and not against us. But they have tried to wield the story by working backwards themselves. So a lot of times you have trouble fighting against this nonsense because what they have done is they looked at the evidence and they decided to build the upside down story based on that theology going backwards, like an upside down pyramid. So therefore, they've taken evidence and they built a story around it. So when you say, oh, they don't have evidence, well, they do. They just invented a story. Ours, we can't really mess with too much. The scripture already tells us exactly what happened. So we have to figure out, like, how did this happen? Why did this happen? So not hard to do. They've done it for us. The scientists have actually already confirmed a lot of these things. Why would there be pathological differences spread around and among these group of people? Well, when you start migrating in small populations of no more than 20 individuals, inbreeding becomes a problem because you need expansion of the human population. Being in a small group of people makes a lot of problems. It makes a lot of problems when it comes to mutations. It makes physiological problems. Everybody knows what inbreeding does today, but it didn't really matter to these people because they were just trying to live. We know that they became less fit because of this, a lot, by 40%. And very something interesting is we know these are people from earlier on, right after the ark, which we always tell everybody. But here's something very unique about that is they actually had more DNA. Now, I don't know if you've thought about what that means, but that means that they would be able to live a lot longer than us. You see, what happens inside the human body is that we go through the aging process of what's called the Hayflick limit. Now, it's really popular. It's one of the theories of aging, and it says that every time we go through a cellular replication, we lose bits of DNA every single time. Now, at the end of each chromosome, we have these things called telomeres, and they're like little brake pads at the end that wear down until eventually there's no more padding left, and then it starts to damage our actual DNA. Not a lot of damage can occur before we actually die. This usually happens about 40 to 60 cellular replications, and then it's over. It's called the limit, the Hayflick limit. So now what would happen if we had larger sections and more DNA, like literally the entire size of an entire chromosome? That's how much DNA there is there. That's almost like the size of the Y chromosome. So if you have more DNA, you can allow more structural damage before you actually die. So imagine larger telomeres, more DNA. You have more padding, you have more protection, you would be able to live longer. That would be expected if we were in the creation model, if humans are degenerating. And that is exactly what we see. So another great piece of evidence for you. Now, here's another great study. Neanderthal in small populations, they've shown, would become extinct after 10,000 years. So how could they have survived 400,000 years? The study really has put a nail in the coffin to these being ancestors of ours that have lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Even tens of thousands of years is impossible based on their new understanding of these small population groups of people. Why? Because inbreeding would have completely destroyed them. We already knew it hurt them physiologically, anatomically, and we know it's the reason they went extinct as a people group. So let's take this information that we have and come down and look at it from how about differences, genetic differences, because this is what the evolutionists always try to look for when they're building and constructing their phylogenetic trees now. They assume that the more differences, substitution differences, I should say, the more diverse they were and the longer that they existed, because it would have taken a long time to acquire more substitution differences. I'm going to dispel that nonsense today, and we are going to look first at, I believe this is, I forget where I took this from, very popular website. Smithsonian actually is where this comes from. And we're going to read the highlighted area here. And it says, most human sequences, this is in the mitochondria, by the way, differ from each other by an average of about 8 substitutions. By the way, this goes all the way up to 20. While the human and chimpanzee differences, there's 55 differences of substitutions that are different between us. That's a lot in between. But Neanderthals and modern humans differ from an approximate 27.2, meaning Neanderthal have substitutions that are fixed anywhere between 5 and 27. So that is really, really good. So when we look at something like this chart, we see that Neanderthal and humans are on the top right here, have about 22 fixed substitutions, with human and humans having, humans only getting around 22 maximum, but Neanderthal can go outside of that. When this study was done, there was only 24 substitutions maximum that they had discovered when they analyzed 1,500 people. Now, we've done more than that today, so the number is up to 27.5. So there's not that many fixed substitution differences between Neanderthal and human, right? We all fit right in. So by them saying that we overlap, they're trying to say that, well, there could be Neanderthals even among us today. That's essentially what they could mean by that. So now, how can we explain this? Very simple. But first, let's read this. The evolutionary dates are clearly dependent on many tenuous assumptions. It seems reasonable to assume that the majority of the discrepancies in length between the Neanderthal and existent humans' mtDNA lineages is due to the stochastic differences in the amount of substitutions that have become fixed on the two lineages. Okay, so what's going on here is when let's say that there's mutations and they're occurring in all the different people alive at the time, just like they are now. Some substitutions are, I should say, the mutation rates are all fairly consistent. It's the difference between people jogging and a full-on sprint. Some people are going to cross the finish line at maybe 9 minutes. The others will cross it at 18. But in reality, that's not a very large gap. For evolution to be true, the race would have had to been done by a crippled midget with a blindfold on walking backwards. That's how slow they need the mutation rate to be. It isn't. So we can explain the genetic diversity based on the young Earth creation model on what we see, what we observe. And it makes more sense with us because the evidence that we have, which tells us that the mutation rates are fast and that Neanderthal lived in small population groups with fast mutation rates, we're going to get fixation really, really quickly because it's based on population size. If there's only 20 people and they're inbreeding, you're going to get fixation very, very quickly over a short amount of time. So it's the reason we can see a small group of people that lived for probably 1,000 years after the Ark landed, and they had 27 fixed substitutions. Well, that would be completely expected until they died out because rapid fixation in small populations. The reason it's not a problem today is we have an expanse of human population that was an explosion. And when there's a huge population growth, imagine trying to get a fixation in a large population that's also growing. It's the reason that we have 8 on average with human beings. Some of them, like in Africa, have more. And the reason they have more isn't because evolution is true and they've existed for hundreds of thousands of years longer. It's because they live in smaller populations as a people group. That's what they still do there to this day. So it shouldn't be expected that we wouldn't find that. Of course, it's what we would find. It would be what we would expect to find. So what do we know? Well, today we know that the analysis of the Neanderthal DNA has failed to demonstrate any significance from DNA of modern human beings. They're just like us. So all these nonsensical charts that they drew from the early 1900s have proven to be falsified, and they're nothing but storytelling. And they admit that. And now we know that Neanderthals are less different from human beings than bears are to bears. So there you go. There you have it. I mean, they're losing everything they have every step of the way. They did what the mammoth did. The mammoth died from inbreeding because they lived in the same horrible conditions and regions that Neanderthal did. They went north after the flood, and that wasn't very good because look at what the mammoth have to eat. It looks like patches of grass, not very good for humans to live off of. So the humans were nomadically following the mammoth that were also inbreeding and dying. And guess who were following them? The dire wolf and the saber-toothed tiger and other things that went extinct because the main food source died, which was the woolly mammoth. Humans are pretty good, but we have to have food and we can't be inbreeding. So both of those things suggest that that group of people chose to go in the wrong direction after the ark landed. That's just going to happen. You only have four directions you can go, right? North, south, east, and west. So if the north is the Arctic and it's cold and there's an ice age, and you go up there, you don't have a compass. You might not know how to get back out. So that's kind of like if you look at the trajectory of where they went after Spain and they started going north, it didn't fare too well for them. They got more lost until they died. And that's what the genetic evidence shows, and the physical evidence and the abnormalities of the bones as time went on. They started to get more defects as well. And how do we know that some of these are physical defects, like the large brow ridges and the chin? We already talked about the chin, but the children we know didn't have these large brow ridges. So how could they have grown them later in life? Well, they did. It doesn't matter how they did it. It was just the physical features that are going to manifest when you live in specific conditions on Earth. That's just to be expected. We shouldn't expect that the human physical form can't adapt to change to some degree. Now, is it to the degree that evolution would say, where we can, just start turning into something else? Absolutely not. I mean, we have a lot of diversity in people today. Doesn't mean much, though. We can still go, there's a midget and there's a guy with giantism. Are they human? Well, yeah, you can look at them and tell that they are human. It's not a confusion. Nobody stands there and wonders what they are if they're actually human. Of course not. So there's one more thing I wanted to throw up here. Let me find it. Actually, I'll share this picture as I look for it. What you're looking at here is the difference between the size of a skull and the brain of a Neanderthal on the left and a modern day human on the right. And you'll notice that the back is where the size difference really comes in. This is called the occipital lobe in the back of the brain, and it has to do with vision. And the reason we know that Neanderthals had better vision is because we've actually found their artwork. And their artwork has showed us that they actually had much better vision. Not just a little, a lot. I think that probably came from the fact that they lived in regions like the snow and the cold, where you would need to see farther in the distance, and you just can't because, as you know, in snowstorms, you have almost zero visibility. And then there's fog and rain and snow, and these things make it extremely hard. And here's some of their jewelry that we found, and they had very intricate drawings. And this is in a region of the world where they didn't have, you would imagine, lots of free time, but yet they were still doing things. They were taking time to bury their dead. They would do artwork and jewelry and cave drawings. They made instruments. They found flutes. They were just normal people that you threw in the north in a time before technology, and they did what they had to and what they could to survive until they bred themselves out of existence from inbreeding. And we know they had better vision, and we know that they definitely could have lived longer. We know that their pathology came from the fact that they were inbreeding. So these aren't really very hard to explain anymore. But when we jump over into the differences between a chimpanzee or another primate and human, they're like looking for a needle in a haystack to try to find these physical similarities when their differences are just vast. That's why on the picture I always show here, the vast amounts of differences you can immediately deem just looking at the bones themselves. And we're going to cover some of those, but we're going to cover differences as well, other than just bone structure. Another one would be very good, would be the hyoid bone right here in the throat. and it's only found in human beings that has the function of helping us speak. It's what gives humans the ability to vocalize and give language. Obviously, if you were to give this to primates, it still really wouldn't matter because they have the ability to like gurgle out sounds when they're hooked up to electrodes and actually forced to speak and give human words, and they can do it. So it really doesn't matter because they don't have the mental capacity to do so. Matter of fact, they're so stupid. Octopus and birds and a lot of other animals are actually smarter than them. The capacity of a chimpanzee mentally is around 2 to 2.5 years old, and there's all kinds of animals that already outscore them. But when it comes to this physical trait, that's something we find in humans. And then we have the subcutaneous layer of fat that runs underneath our skin. They want us to believe somehow that the chimpanzees that don't need this somehow over time we lost this ability like them to regulate body temperature, and we evolved an entirely new system where we now have fat that flows underneath the skin of our entire body to regulate temperature. So that's right, everybody. We lost our fur so that we now have to stay warm by consuming higher amounts of fat and covering ourselves up with animal fur to stay warm. That's the mental capacity of the atheist and evolutionist. We have goosebumps. They do not. It's a human only thing. We have long hair on the top of our heads. Primates have the exact opposite. They do not. They cannot grow it no matter how much they would want to. They have body fur. We do not. We have little follicles and little tiny hairs that do absolutely nothing for keeping us warm whatsoever. We have melanin, which we randomly evolved by hypothetical chance. And if you shave a primate, they are completely pale. So they would actually get skin cancer by not having protected layers of fur over them for that. They're completely pale. They want us to believe that the first humans were black. So we just immediately got some random mutation after we lost all of our fur and evolved this new subcutaneous layer of fat. We just automatically evolved skin color because we need to protect us from sun damage. So it had to happen quickly. You just can't have generations of albinos in Africa walking around. You die. It doesn't do good. You get skin cancer. Vision is completely different. Yet again, this should be obvious, but unfortunately it's not. Humans are superior to chimpanzees with respect to organizing coherency and moving objects. I don't know why I put that one on there, but here we go. Another good one. The differences between even the sclera of the eyes. It's darker than human eyes in the primates. It's always going to be darker. They also have we have eyebrows. They have no eyebrows. This one's good. Xenotransfusions is where we take blood from one animal and we put it into a human being. We've shown that doing that with any primate is extremely dangerous. It's caused death in humans that have tried it. The closest blood to us is actually a pig, and it's the same size, but still different blood. They've given chimpanzees and primates the same blood type letters as humans. So the general public is again lied to and swindled by the assumption that, oh, they have the same blood types, it must be the same as ours. It's not. It's just more lies. Here's the orphan genes, completely different in human beings and in primates. Since orphan genes are taxonomically restrictive genes that are organized different per kind, we would expect that only in the creation model. This was not predicted by the evolutionary model, obviously. We found them, and not only are they different, they're functionally different, and they're found in different places. So the microbiome is completely different on the skin between humans, chimpanzees, gorillas. As you can tell in humans, it's vastly different. Then we have the brain, which language is the only thing that human beings have that the animal kingdom does not. We need grammar to have language, by the way. So don't tell me that your dog barking is communicating using language. It's not. That's stupid. And it's saying that apes and gorillas have sign language. No, they don't. Not grammar. Yet again, learn what that is. Humans only have the rose hip neurons. Chimpanzees, primates do not. Only humans have this. So another difference. Here's a fun one: the bacillum or bacillum. It is the bone that is used for reproduction in primates, all primates. Humans do not have this. So we needed to lose this bone and instantly evolve an organ for sexual reproduction. How long could we have gone without that? That's right, not one generation, not even a single generation could pass without reproduction occurring. Where is this in the fossil record? Where do we see that in any of the human lineage that we talk about that are humans, that we see this transition happening? Nowhere. It is a nonsensical, stupid story that they invented that they have no evidence for yet again. Shocker, I know. So I like this, most primate males have this. So humans are rather an oddity in that they don't have one. No, it's not. It's only confusing if you're an evolutionist, which then everything is probably confusing. So humans are more sensitive than chimpanzees to infectious disease problems. Why is that? They have better methylation factors than us. They can get a disease and live their entire life with it without any compromised problems for the most part. Human beings, not so much. We have different salivary glands as them, different salivary amylase, the saliva that we produce in our glands. Epigenetically, we are very, very, very different. Matter of fact, if you look inside, we find the methylations are different and mostly found in the human brain. But as in the chimpanzee, it's not in the brain at all. It's mostly found in the liver, the kidneys, the heart. Completely opposite. So why is it that we find these major discrepancies when we look? These are just kissing cousins. Remember, they said these are 98.9% identical to us, right? But yet all these differences. We go to the microbiome. Yet again, huge differences. Why? We eat very similar. We evolved in the same regions of the world, eating the same exact things, living in Africa most of that time, doing the exact same things. But here we are, extremely different. How about eyebrows? Only humans. Oh, so we lost that, right? We just decided to evolve eyebrows all of a sudden. Yeah, that makes sense. The human heart are significantly different from ape hearts. Shocker, right? How about the hearing? Oh, that's right. The average chimpanzee can hear close to 30 gigahertz. They can hear much better. But also, the hearing in humans is very different as well. The bones in our ear help us regulate our equilibrium. They actually help us walk around. How we hear actually helps us function in our movement. Very different than primates, yet again. Chimp bones themselves are densely packed with microscopic structures that are spongy bones. Humans' bones aren't. So that means when we find bones on the ground, they say, there's no way to tell the difference between a primate and a human. Right there's how you can do it. How about the length of the intestinal tract? Oh, look at that. Completely different. Ours is over twice as long. Here we go. Look at that. Humans have a smaller total gut volume by mass. That's right. Our intestinal flora, very different. How about cognition? We mentioned brain. Primates don't even score when it comes to an IQ test. That's how dumb they are. That's right. When they tested ravens and crows, they showed that they were smarter than chimpanzees. Our cousin, that's 99% similar to us. They're basically borderline retarded. How about an octopus? That's as smart as a 3-year-old. That makes it smarter than a chimpanzee. How about some parrots? Oh, again, smarter than primates. Outscored them. When they took chimpanzees and they said they could type out Shakespeare, that's the best they could do right there in the middle. They just spammed buttons over and over like an idiot. How about the brain size? Human brain is up to 7 times larger than expected for a mammal of its body size. Gee, I wonder why that is. I wonder if God created us different. How about endogenous retroviruses? Oh, look at that. How about the beneficial function that they have inside the human body? Yet they want us to believe that we were bombarded by ancient viruses that somehow died in our system, became dormant, and then so many compiled that they became beneficial. Think about that stupidity for a minute, right? Now, our bodies are constantly losing water. When we get wet, go to the restroom, even when we breathe, when you stand in a freezer and you can see your own breath when you speak. We need water to replenish to keep the body volume and the body fluids at a normal range. And yet, research published in March 5th shows that the human body uses 30 to 50% less water per day than our closest cousin. In other words, among primates, humans evolved to be a low flow model. Where's their evidence for that in the fossil record? Where can they show us any of these steps? They can't do it. They never can, and they never will. The human sense of smell. These are called olfactory senses, by the way. It's commonly believed to be relatively poor compared to that of other mammals, including the great apes. Why is that? Think about that. Do we use our other senses more? Do we need to be like smelling things as much as an animal would be? Of course not. When something lives in the trees and it has to smell if there's danger, if it has to smell food to see if it's toxic or not, that's a lot more important than a human, which can use our minds. We can visually see if there's going to be a problem. We can hear. We have a lot of other senses that allow us to cognitively say, this is a dangerous situation. There's something going on here. We can literally talk to one another. We can team up. We can do a lot of things. We can create anything to protect us. Animals don't do that. This is the one that really upsets them. The very dictionary itself says humans are different. They're distinguished from an animal. So now here's what the critics always go to. They go to the genetic similarities. But the genetic similarity is not as high as they want it to be. And the genome size is actually very different. And they have a hard time dealing with this over the 7 million years split that they actually think occurred. Imagine if they increased that duration of time. That's what they need to do, but they can't do it because they keep finding evidence that lowers the time duration, not enhances. I think it's 6.5 now. So let's see why there would be such a new gap now of genetic diversity that shows relation now being not 98%. Why is it going down?
It's often said that we humans share 50% of our DNA with bananas, 80% with dogs, and 99% with chimpanzees. Taken literally, those numbers make it sound like we could pluck one cell from a chimp and one from a human, pull out the tangled bundles of DNA known as chromosomes, unroll each one like a scroll, and read off two nearly identical strings of letters. But in reality, the human and chimp scrolls don't sync up so easily. Other large mutations revised huge sections of text, duplicating a chunk of human DNA here, erasing a chunk of chimp DNA there, while throughout the scrolls, tiny mutations swapped one letter for another. When researchers sat down to compare the chimp and human genomes, those single-letter differences were easy to tally, but the big mismatch sections weren't. For example, if a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes, or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatch sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours. So just counting up the number of genetic changes doesn't really tell us that much about how similar or different two creatures are.
So, shocker, I know, they lied to you. What a epiphany. So genetic similarities should be expected because the programmer doesn't recreate a program every time they're going to create something. That would be stupid. If you were a programmer for a computer system, would you do that? Would you be that dumb? Would you literally say, okay, I made this awesome program. I'm just going to start over from scratch and make the next one? Of course not. So finding a hierarchical pattern in programs on your computer should be expected. That's what a designer would do. Do we find that? Yes, we do. It's pretty easy to tell when there's a program designed for a Mac or a PC. So would the creator of all life that we were made in his image do the same thing, creating life on Earth? Of course he would use the same program. So when we see hierarchical patterns, why is that? It's because that's obvious. You would use the same gene for a construction of the eye, like a PAX6 gene. So though it functions and does different things in different life, that's what it was designed to do for that life form. It's pretty obvious. So overall, I just wanted to go through and talk really simple about the massive differences that separate us from primates that exist. And then also explain some of the diversity that we see in Neanderthal and explain them in our model and why it just makes more sense. And then just stay tuned for the new book that's going to be coming out. We'll keep everybody up to date on when that is going to happen because even we don't know yet. So as we get closer to the time frame, we'll update everybody. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed. Batman is out.